We're talking about championing people-centered leaders in profit-driven cultures, which there are a lot of in this world. People-centered leadership is not soft or nice to have, it's actually incredibly strategic.
I measure people on outputs rather than inputs. And I think that's a big difference that we're talking about here as well, is that people who measure the input rather than the output are the ones that tend to have damaging cultures. And it's not a nice environment to work in.
You can create the culture in your team. You're allowed to do that within the confines of what you're doing. You can nudge things a little bit and start to be that seed of change, because if you don't, then it's never going to shift.
If you focus on people-centered leadership rather than back to the numbers, back to the spreadsheets, then you're actually doing things like prioritising ethical leadership, fairness and inclusivity, which is more important these days than it's ever been. It's more at the front of the conversation than it's ever been. But it also does things like protect your brand reputation. And that actually is a big chunk of what builds your business. You're actually managing risks by being people-centered. Hey, welcome to the Leaders Podcast with me, Laura McDonald, the leadership coach and mentor. Come with me as I explore the elements of leadership that give leaders like you the power and confidence to make the impact you know you can. I'll be sharing my own experiences, top tips and insights, and talking to some very special guests to share their thoughts and leadership experiences on mindset, influence, change and growth. So let's get right to it. Another fantastic roundtable is coming your way, and I'm very excited to talk to today's guests, both newcomers to the podcast. I'm welcoming Jenni Field, internal communication and leadership credibility expert, author of the multi-award nominated book Nobody Believes You, co-host of the podcast Frequency and co-founder of the Belief Builders, as well as the fabulous James Moffatt, certified business psychologist, executive and performance coach, multi-award winning developer of people, and managing director of Embed Learning and Clear Training Limited. Welcome to the Leaders Podcast, guys.
Keep having us.
No problem.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I'm glad to speak to you both. It's been a while waiting for this one. So looking forward to hearing both your points of view. Before we start, I have a question that I ask all of my guests, and I've had some really interesting answers on this in the last year, as well as some really different ones. So curious to know what both of your answers will be. Throughout the podcast, we've had a running message of the importance of serving yourself so you can serve others better. My question to you both is, what have you done to serve yourself in the last 24 hours?
To serve myself. So to look after myself and to make sure I'm doing good things. So I am really good at this, actually. So this morning, as we're recording, I have got up and had a sauna and then a cold plunge at my gym. And I find that incredibly important, either doing something like that or a walk in the morning before I start my day. So I always start with something like that so I can serve others well for the rest of the day.
Amazing. James, what about you?
It's very similar to Jenni, actually. Not identical. There was no gym involved. I tend to do mine in the evening. But it started in COVID when I was locked up at home, four walls of the house all day, every day. It helped me get into working mode to simulate my commute to the office. I'd leave my front door, walk around the block, back through the front door, and then I'm at work. And I did that this morning as well. Got some milk on the way as well, which is quite useful.
Do you know what? I've had a similar routine build since we've had our little man, because I take him to preschool in the morning. So that's my kind of journey to work, as it were, when I get home. As soon as I walk in the door, that's it, I'm at work. It's actually more settling than the days I start from home.
Definitely.
Yeah, Jenni, we actually had another guest on a few weeks ago who does what you do, like sauna and cold plunges and things like that. And he does like an ice bath every morning. And his immediate advice to me was, don't do it.
To be fair, this morning, I was like, I really don't want to get in here today. It's like 7 degrees and I've got to do 3 minutes, but I always feel better afterwards. And I try and do it twice a week. And it definitely does make a bit of a difference. So, yeah, but there's no ice involved. That's just lunacy.
Yeah. I mean, he's a rugby guy, so.
Yeah.
I can
He
sort of understand
he probably needs to more than I do.
Yeah. Most likely, yeah. Good stuff. Okay, well, thank you both for letting me know what your answers are for that. So today we're talking about championing people-centered leaders in profit-driven cultures, which there are a lot of in this world. I know I've worked for some of them for sure. So we're going to explore why people-centered leadership is not soft or nice to have. It's actually incredibly strategic. So let's start by unpacking why that tension exists between people and profit. What's going on there in your guys' view?
I have worked in many profit-driven cultures. A lot of the organizations I worked in were sales-oriented, and a lot of it's old, outdated attitudes. It's historical kind of habit, if you like. I mean, you want to see how your company's doing, look at a spreadsheet. You want to see how the organization's doing, look at last year's figures compared to this year's figures. And we measure it on that because money matters. Let's face it, it does matter. You have to pay people with it. It's the reason we're in business in the first place, is to make some money out of it and a bit of a living. Unfortunately, some of these larger organizations aren't making it for themselves. They have stakeholders, they have shareholders, they have pressure from above, cost pressures, etc. And I mean, I'm a big believer that you can't change performance by analyzing numbers, but it is a key indicator as to where things do need to change. But people don't see it as a key indicator. They see it as everything. They see it as an indicator as to how to treat people and to beat them with a stick sometimes. Depends on, again, as I've said, it's outdated attitudes. It depends on the type of leader that you've got. And it is habit. And there is a very common psychological phenomenon, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, which is called reverting to type. When you're under pressure, people revert to what they've always done and what they've always known. And it takes a concerted effort to try and change those behaviors and habits. And it's about repeating behaviors consciously. You repeat behaviors consciously for a period of time, they start to become more habitual. And it's just about driving that, which is easier said than done. Cool.
I'd agree. The only thing I'd add is that I think it's because it's easier to focus on the numbers than the people. There's an element of control around numbers and financials that you have. It's much easier to focus on that and talk about that and think about how you can fix that. Whereas people are messy.
Absolutely.
There is chaos I talk a lot about chaos in organizations, and part of that is because of people, but organizations don't exist without them. And I think if you just focus on the numbers, which so many people do, you're not focusing on actually what moves that organization, what runs it. Organizations are people, they don't exist without them. So I think it's easier just to focus on a spreadsheet and try and beat people with a big stick than it is to do the hard work around developing yourself, developing your managers, and taking that time to understand people and how to build those relationships at work to make work better.
It was curious because a few years ago I watched a TED Talk, and one of the sort of messages through that was that, motivation takes time, for example, as one example. Motivation takes time. It takes, a long time. It takes real strategy. It takes a lot of effort. And I wondered actually if in today's world, especially given how fast paced it is as well, that a lot of leaders just very quickly lose patience doing that.
Yeah. I think they don't have the time. And I think that feels like an excuse. And I always say that's an excuse because no one's too busy. That is an excuse. But I do think that the pace and the pressure that's being put on leaders and managers means that their time is squeezed, and therefore they struggle to find the time to do those things because they're being told that those things aren't as important as those things, and therefore you can't be pulled in every direction. And it's not about blame. I think it's just culturally how work has evolved, certainly since the pandemic, of just this like being on a constant hamster wheel. And I do think working at home doesn't help that.
Oh, it's fast-paced, yeah. Can I relate to something Jenny was saying before with regards to training and development? And you're talking about the fast-paced element. There's this kind of, it's like the sacrificial lamb, isn't it? Training, development. We'll get rid of that first. It's like if there's a crisis, if there's an economic crisis in society, marketing and training are the first things that go, because they're the budgets that you can't show tangible results, really. I mean, you can. It's hard to do it, but it's too much effort, as Jenny was saying. I think there's a huge fear factor involved as well. So you have these senior leaders, these managers in business who, as Jenny mentioned previously, they're good at analysing numbers. And I've said it's a habit. They've done it for a long time. People are messy. And all of that's down to competence. So they don't develop themselves because they're under pressure and they haven't got the time to do it. Therefore, they haven't got the skills to lead these people effectively in an empathic way. And they're scared of doing it. So they'll go to what they know and what's comfortable for them, which is to manage spreadsheets. And sometimes people hide behind bluster. People get, over assertive or even aggressive to hide behind the fact that they lack the competence to deal with people in an empathic and effective way. So there's a huge fear factor in that as well, in my opinion.
That's interesting, isn't it? Like, we often get caught in that, well, I don't know how to do it, so I'm just not going to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, your bullies at school, I mean, the reason they do it is because they're lacking something else in their life and they want to take control over other people and demonstrate control. And to get a grip on a bit of control, they'll pick on someone who's weak, or they'll get over assertive, etc. So, and you know, I'm not saying that people that focus purely on the numbers are bullies, but the bullies tend to be the ones that look at the numbers.
I think it's curious about where like this shows up as well. Like, it can happen, it's got the potential to happen everywhere. But there are certain industries I've noticed in my life that just have more of a tendency to have this happen. So I worked in hospitality for a very long time. Now, given that is an entirely people-centered type business, it's shocking how easily profit-driven cultures develop. But tech industry is another one. You know, anywhere in the tech industry, it's very easy to just start focusing on numbers because, I mean, you look at the work they do, especially if you're, you know, a coder or, you know, something that's like working with very, very tangible things because it is technology. You know, if you've done it, you can see it's there in front of you on the computer. So it's very easy to see things generate very tangibly. So when it comes to leadership development and things like that, especially given that so many people in technology teams are obviously part of a team, but they're kind of working on their own thing. They're very sort of isolated in the way that they work. And it's curious to me that if you take those two industries, technology versus hospitality, how one is generally, as I said, a very people-focused industry because you're focused on giving other people a nice experience, whereas the other one is very tangible. To some extent, it would be understandable that these things happen. But there's plenty of other industries where actually you wouldn't necessarily expect it to become that way.
Low resource, low margins, Laura. You get any industry where it's got low margins and therefore they can't afford the resources, then the pressure ramps up. And again, like we said before, reverting to type, I think there's elements of that involved.
Although I did notice, because the companies I worked for in hospitality were big companies. They had a lot of money, lots of resources. What I actually found was the element that was lacking was time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's hard managing in a hospital. I mean, I've worked in hospitality, both in my youth in a bar and also in my communications career for a retail hospitality business. And that's what drove some of my work into looking at communicating with deskless or frontline workers and how we do that. And I think that is the hardest thing when it comes to leadership. And if you're managing a team, you have to have the time with them. And in environments like retail, you're on shifts, you know, even in healthcare, in anything where you've got that sort of deskless population, it makes it very, very difficult because you don't have that time that you have when you're office-based. So even though you might be more profit-focused in a maybe more office-based environment like a tech company, that's being driven probably out of greed, anything. Whereas I think the profit focus in the hospitality is the focus on the numbers and the like-for-like sales growth and the margin and all of those things. But it's hard to have the time to lead and manage people when you're crossing paths. There's less of an excuse, I think, when you're all together in an office or you're all connected online.
Do you guys have any examples where you think that profit-driven culture's actually lost out on that trust and sort of people-centered element?
I've worked in some profit-focused cultures and our financial results were incredible. People were crying and vomiting, you know, in the toilets before going into meeting. You know, there's balance there. And I laugh about it now, but it was horrendous for a lot of people in that environment. But worryingly, the performance of the organisation didn't suffer. And I think that's what I always find very interesting when I talk about that organisation, because they had a very clear strategic narrative, which we know is a big part of engagement for people. So they know why they're doing what they're doing. They weren't hiding behind that profit-focused culture. And I think that actually that's part of the challenge. I think they work less well when you're pretending that you're a people-first culture, but you're a profit-first culture. And that creates a really toxic environment. Whereas if you're open about the fact that this is really what we're doing, and some people really do want to thrive and be part of that, then people, the organisation can succeed. There is obviously the detriment to people, and some people hate that and doesn't work. And I'm much more of an advocate for, credible leadership, empathetic, supportive, all of those things. But I've experienced it and I've seen it succeed. And so I can't ignore that as an example.
I agree. I've seen it be successful. They tend, in my experience, they tend to be organizations where they get very high turnover, though. You get a lot of people come in, they thrive when they're eager to impress, full of energy. They'll absolutely get their pound of flesh out of them from a profit perspective and a performance perspective. And then when they're absolutely knackered, they'll leave and someone else will come in. And there's a huge high turnover, particularly at the lower levels, there's a huge high turnover of it. I've worked in one. I worked for a very well-known fast food chain many, many years ago, and they got their pound of flesh out of me, but I was eager to impress, young, naive, etc. I recently, not that long ago at all, worked for an organization where some new owners came in. So again, it's a clash of cultures, perhaps. New owners from Spain actually came in. They were a family business and they ran the business it was almost like mafia. They could do what they wanted. The head boss used to walk around with no PPE on around the warehouse where everyone else had to wear PPE. He'd just walk around with a cigarette. In the UK, this was recent in the last 12 months. And people have been working remotely since COVID with no expectation of returning to the office for about 5 years. And culture and practice rules in human resources stipulate that, if there's no expectation of return, and there hasn't been for over 2 years, then it's called culture and practice. So you get new terms and conditions, essentially, even though it's not written, it's kind of your contract. But the new owners demanded everyone returns to the office 5 days a week, no exceptions. People raised issues with staff having disabled children. People had joined the company with that, sort of expectation. Some people didn't have cars. And the exact word that I cannot use on this podcast, but let's just say they said stuff them. Basically, that's what they said. And those are the exact words with the naughty word, not the word I've just used. And I mean, they could have been taken to court, but again, they got away with it. No, loads of people left. Loads of people are still looking to leave. I think they said something along the lines of when people are training, they're not working. That was their attitude. And it just completely, the fact that everyone left and there's loads of people still looking to leave, even though they work there, tells me they're suffering with presenteeism. That's people that go to work but aren't operating to their full capacity. They're just looking for the next opportunity to leave. So the impact on that business from a trust, culture, and ultimately a performance perspective, I think has been quite dramatic. And it's a huge contrast to what it was under the previous leadership. So not nice.
It's intriguing, isn't it, how things get measured. There was I can't remember if it was this year or last year, but there was a particular football club that demanded all its staff that worked in offices return to the office based on the number of emails that were sent on a Friday and with no other statistic.
Okay. Yeah.
That was interesting.
And just doing deep work on a Friday. I mean, when I worked in an office, I worked from home on a lot of Fridays because it was a space to get work done. I wasn't, down the pub or anything. It was just that it gave me time to do work. It's fascinating to me that something like email would be the metric of work. Just think that is that's how we're measuring success, because I can send a lot of emails. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to send a lot of emails. And if that's to you what success is in this organisation, I think we've got a problem with actually achieving anything.
I could type them on a Thursday and program them to send on a Friday.
I know it is your plan.
That's kind
and
of
do you know what?
I
If they're down the pub on a Friday and they've got their laptop and they're working over a beer, I don't care. If it was my company and they were my people and that's what they want to do and it makes them productive and they're in the pub and as soon as they close their laptop, they can be there. Whatever. I measure people on outputs rather than inputs. And I think that's a big, big difference that we're talking about here as well, is that people who measure the input rather than the output are the ones that tend to have damaging cultures. And it's not a nice environment to work in. Some people thrive in it, as we've mentioned, but it's not my cup of tea.
It was a very interesting case. It came up in the news and it was because it was a big Premier League football club as well. So these are not, this is not a place without resources. This place is making a lot of money. And obviously the primary public sort of measure of success, obviously, is whether the team are winning. But that's not necessarily down to the office staff. So it was more like the financial stability of the club and communications and organising events and so on and so forth. So it was all those kinds of stuff. And I was just kind of like, but I don't understand. If the club's still been running and actually managed to survive everything we've been through in the last 5 years, then...
Yeah. But this raises a bigger question for me, and probably not what we're talking about today, but is the structure of work being in our worlds 5 days on, 2 days off. And that's the structure of work and has been the structure of work since Henry Ford invented the car. So when does that change with technology and life and all of those things? Who's going to actually have that conversation and say, actually, we only need to work 4 days and we can have a 3-day weekend? No one is going to have that conversation. But at some point, the advances of technology are going to impact our amount of time we need to work and then our amount of leisure time. And I think that's the big conversation that nobody is going to have. So I don't need to have it today. That's a big question, and it's not what we're here for. But I think that is the challenge for leaders now, is how you balance that.
But it is coming into conversation in lots of different ways as well, from the people-centred element. I saw a clip of a conference that somebody had done yesterday, and they were talking about back in World War II, how when obviously the women had gone into all the jobs that the men were doing because the men were off fighting, they'd set up...
It's a man's world, Laura.
Childcare. They'd set up things like, universal childcare. Like somebody asked the question, like, why is the school day this time and to this time when the working day is this time to this time? And they said back in World War II, it was set up so that women could work and take care of the children because they had to. And then we did the same in COVID. We adapted to things like remote working and hybrid working and all this sort of stuff. And then we just returned to the norm. Well, actually, why don't some of those things stick?
Yeah.
To allow that people-centred leadership to come through.
Yeah.
And stay.
But I do think there is something on this sort of time at work linked to people-centred leadership, which has to link to some of the data. So I was reading some research from Gallup in their book Culture Shock recently, where they talk about the 4-day work week, which is probably where we're at the moment in terms of that shift, and trying to do people-centred leadership around, let's have a 4-day week and have a 3-day weekend. The research from Gallup shows that people on a 4-day work week experience the most stress and burnout out of the different groups of people who work 5 days or 6 days. And I know organisations that are doing the 4-day work week, and it's because they're not addressing everything else that is trying to solve. So you end up just trying to cram in 5 days worth of work, if not probably more, into 4, because you don't have that space to breathe that having a 5-day work week does bring. So I think there's something for me about that. There's the best of intentions there, but there are some unintended consequences, and there are bigger things to solve if you want to be a proper people-centred organisation. It's not just let's move to a 4-day work week, because your whole organisation and operation has to adapt to do that. And that takes work and effort, and you have to think about all of those things if you really want to make that people-centred culture stick.
As I said earlier, people-centred leadership is not soft, it's very strategic. So how do we make the case that this is not a nice to have, but an essential?
Well, for those people that look at spreadsheets and money all day long, they should look at the cost of increased turnover. I crunched some numbers. I've looked at this before previously anyway. So it's Oxford Economics. I mean, this is 2-3 years old now, these numbers. I think it might be even longer than that. So they've not gone down, guys, But you're looking at around £25,000 is the cost of turnover for one person. That's obviously the recruitment costs, payouts, holiday pay, all that sort of stuff, uniforms, training, lack of productivity, all the other elements. But it can be anywhere from 50% to 200% of somebody's salary is the cost of one person leaving a business. So if you've got a turnover of 20-25% a year, because these staff are leaving and coming back in, and you've got an organisation with 1,000 people, that's 250 people times 25 grand. And it's just... That doesn't mean you're going to lose that money, because what it might mean is that you're beating everyone else with a stick harder to make up the shortfall. And it is, if you look at it from that perspective and reputation, trying to attract new people, you're not going to get the best people out there because they've got the pick of the bunch. Why would they come to an organisation that rumours are that they don't treat you very well? Well, I'm going to go somewhere else. Thank you very much. So, I mean, the implications are multiple, and I think it's a huge awareness piece around costs behind it. For those people that like looking at spreadsheets, it would absolutely tick their box. And for everyone else, I think it's just morally the right thing to do. And where would you like to work?
It's a big question, isn't it? Like, how do you do it? And I have this conversation on my frequency podcast all the time. So I was talking about the employee engagement stats. Again, I've sort of been in a rabbit hole of Gallup over the last sort of 3-4 months. And in the UK, I was at an event with them the other day, and they shared that in the UK, 90%, that's 90% of workers in Britain are either disengaged or actively disengaged. And so I have bigger questions over why we measure something that doesn't seem to be going in the right direction. I've been measuring it for quite some time.
Yeah.
So for your question about kind of like, how do we do this? There is a mindset piece here for me that has to be addressed for leaders that I don't think is being addressed. And I don't think it's being addressed through their development if they work their way up through an organization. I don't think it's talked about on any MBA or anything like that. But leadership is a skill, and it is something that you have to develop and learn. Just because you've made widgets your whole life and you're a widget making company doesn't mean that you're best skilled to lead that widget making company, because leadership is different. And I think if you have a mindset as a leader of growth and wanting to learn and wanting to serve others, I heard a great quote the other day that was, I am not here to mark your paper, I'm here to help you get an A. And that is the mindset. So if we can help develop leaders into this mindset and create space for that conversation at leadership conferences and events, then we would start to see that shift. But until those conversations become normal at events where CEOs and anyone in the C-suite is gathering, then it's going to be really hard to actually make that shift, because we are so governed by financials, especially with the stock market, private equity, everything is governed by that. So it's going to take quite a big shift, but that shift has to be in conversations in those places and helping people think about that mindset and the impact. To James's point, look at the numbers of retention if that's what's going to work for you. But if your focus is reputation or it's risk or whatever it is you're looking at as a leader of that organization, between all of us here at this table, we can give you any number of stats and insights that would tell you that focusing on people first would improve all of those things in the organization, because organizations are people and we have to have good relationships. So for me, it's much bigger, and I'd love to say there's a quick fix to do it, but I think these conversations need to become more normal in the environments where leaders are. And that's my life's work, it feels, to try and get to those spaces, to talk to leaders, to really explain this. Because I can talk at HR conferences, I speak at communication conferences, and I do speak at some leadership events, but not enough to probably make the impact that I think all of us here really want to see.
I mean, having a speaker at an event is just great. It's great. It's communication information. I mean, I'm sure we've all been sat in these events and had this information. We're trying to do transformation rather than information, but it comes to us and we leave on a high feeling, yes, this is what we really want to do. And then you get back to the workplace, pressure's on, and you revert to type. This is, what happens. So there does need to be a real commitment from people in senior positions to live and breathe this, to become the change you want to see in the world, as Gandhi said. But it's certainly backed up by research and evidence, as Jenni was saying as well. I think it was Musk, Tuxson and Firstenow this year did a literature review, strongly supporting the link between empathy and trust, as well as performance in the workplace. It also promotes others to be more empathic in the workplace, boosts equity and interpersonal relationships, and it also improves performance. So all of these benefits come from having empathic leaders. So the benefits are there. They're proven in science. They've been backed up with the literature and research. The financials are plain for everyone to see as well. So what is it that's holding them back and stopping them from doing it? This is the question we need to answer. What is stopping them from doing it? I think we've alluded to some of it already. I think there'll be a slow transition as some elements of the workforce fade out into retirement and new breed come through with different expectations. Gen X's are coming through, Gen Z's and Gen Y's are coming through, etc. I think there's more women coming into board roles now. Don't get me wrong, I have met some very ruthless women in my time at senior levels and senior leaderships, but they do tend to be more empathic. But women are more interested in people, men are more interested in things. This is a clear, again, psychological evidence supports that. So having more women in senior positions in organizations will hopefully contribute towards the empathy element too. So I do think over a period of time, chronologically, it's going to change. And I guess what we want to do is just speed that up as much as possible.
I had an interesting touch point, actually, in the last round table where we discussed the point at which training and development for leadership actually happens. So one of the things I do is deliver things like ILM courses and CMI courses. And I've been doing that for a number of years. It is exceedingly rare nowadays for me to have anybody under the age of 21 on those courses. usually the leaders I encounter have been in post for several years by that point as well. So they've not had this development. They've not had that open conversation. They've not had that connection of, oh, okay, I don't have to do this on my own from day one. So all they've got is the example of the leadership above them, around them, etc. And yeah, you kind of do what they've always done, don't you? You just kind of follow the example you've been given, because you're like, as Jenni said, this isn't the job role that you were doing before. This is leadership. It's different. It's a career change. It's a whole new thing that you're now doing. Yeah. So if you're not having that conversation with people from the start, if you're not integrating that development and training and knowledge and these more, I suppose, modern approaches to leadership, like empathy and creating psychological safety and building trust and all this from day one, then of course they're not going to do it. I've got leaders on programs right now who have been in their roles for 10, 20 years and never had any leadership development.
It's just a little bit, because where does that responsibility lie? Like, it's very easy to say, well, my company haven't given me any development, so I'm a rubbish leader. But actually, that's your responsibility. Like, there are courses you can go on. There are, I've written a book called How to Be a Credible Leader. There are other books out there. There are podcasts. There's so many ways to learn. And I think if you're sitting back and just waiting for someone to tell you how to do it because you're not going to take the initiative to learn, then is that somebody that's built for kind of leadership? Do you know what I mean? Have they got that curiosity and that interest in others and that desire to learn and lead? I'm not sure. And I struggle a bit with no one's given me any development, so this is acceptable. I do agree that organizations need to be better at development. That's a given. Most organizations I work with don't seem to have a leadership development program or anything around communication skills or anything around that. But there has to be this responsibility on you as an individual, because no one can make you do it. If you want to lead and you want to be a great leader, you've got to want to learn how to do that. I can't make you do that. Mel Robbins' book, Net Them Theory, is a great overview of the fact that you can't, change someone else's behaviour. You just have to sort of let them. And there is that sort of learned helplessness that seems to be happening in that manager level is a bigger risk. And I don't know how we fix that. I feel like we have to take a little bit of accountability and ownership of our own development here as well.
That was the crux for me, was like, okay, I'm, not ready for formal courses and all this sort of stuff yet, but I do want to find out what I can. And I didn't necessarily know where to go with that in the beginning. You're talking, a good sort of 19, 20 years ago now. I didn't know where to go with that, but it was just simple things like, somebody introducing me to TED Talks.
Yes.
That opens up immediately like a whole world of information and thoughts and different perspectives that you'd never had access to before. Joining the Institute of Leadership all those years ago, things like being introduced to the Meet the Author series, which is how I know you, just having these books and these resources and all this sort of stuff highlighted to you. You've got to be that proactive in your own development. And it's, so what I was talking about was formal learning, actual qualifications, which is not right for everybody. I understand that, But we do have to take a certain amount of responsibility for the fact that you can learn in any way that suits you.
Yeah. 100%. And there's so many different ways now. And I think that's the benefit of technology. To your point, TED Talks, there's podcasts, there's, LinkedIn Learning. There is the ability to have probably a mentor at work, or just speaking to your boss and saying, how did you get here? Like, there's asking those questions, and doing that is so important. And I think you have to do that. And if you're not willing to do that, then I would question whether or not leadership is the right career choice for you.
Just for devil's advocate, I've been thinking while we've been talking. That's unusual for me. In relation to, let's say I'm at work, I'm 21, 23, whatever, and this leader at work, a leader, has recruited loads of what I call mini-me's from Austin Powers, loads of people in his own image, and has kept grooming me and saying, you're going to be great, you're going to be a really good leader, you're everything that I want in a leader, which is basically just like him or her, and isn't necessarily the best thing. So in other words, you don't know what you don't know. I don't know I need any development. As far as I'm told by a crap boss, I'm brilliant, right? My terrible boss has told me I'm great, therefore I don't need any development. So and I'm sure there are a few people like that floating around. So how do we get through to those people? Because there's a bit of a monkey see, monkey do as well. If I've got somebody above me who acts a certain way and I can see them getting results, albeit not the right way, but we're measured on results, results give you rewards, then why would I not just do what they do and think that's the right thing to do?
Because I do think you would have individual relationships that would show you that there might be some gaps.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm thinking about my own journey here, where I'm a very task-focused individual. And less people-focused person. And I've had to really develop myself to build that. But I know that where I have worked with people where they've said, this is great, keep doing this, that approach works with some people. But then when you take that approach into other places, you don't get the outcome you want. And I think for me, it's always about what's the impact or the outcome that either I'm trying to achieve or I'm experiencing. Is that what I want? Is it not? And how do I need to adapt and change that? So that's the bit we have to pay attention to. If you have got that mini-me approach and that's working brilliantly with every single stakeholder you've got in every aspect of your life, I would be really surprised because I think there will be one or two where you'll have to go, this isn't working here. I don't know what to do. And then you've got to figure it out. And I was very lucky. I had some coaching quite early on in an organization when I was internal communications officer. And that was things like, don't walk around with your notebook like under your arm and blocking your body to other people, and walk a bit slower and try and slow your pace to match the people that you're talking to, because HR are slightly terrified for you. Because I was excited and full of all these things. So it's learning all of that. It's learning those little cues and those little behaviours that you need to adjust. And I think wherever you are, you've got to tune into those. So I think that would be my advice to those people who are going, I'm smashing this and I'm great and I'm getting all my rewards. If I was coaching them, I'd be asking questions around like, is it everywhere? Like, let's talk about somewhere where it might not be working, and then let's go from there.
I mean, that's what I was alluding to, Jenny, was I said they've got monkey see, monkey do. I've got this manager above me who thinks I'm great because I'm doing everything that they do. And they've got a couple of anomalies in the team maybe, but maybe it's their fault, not mine, because that's what I've been told. Was the rewards aspect. So it gets results doing this. I've seen my boss doing it. It gets results, et cetera, et cetera. But, and that brings us on to another thing I think we're going to talk about later, which is to do with rewards and recognition and so on. And how do we highlight behavior that's appropriate and that's good? And it's rewards and consequences drive behavior. If you want to change behavior, there has to be rewards, or the consequences for it have to be highlighted. So there's another piece around that, isn't there?
Yeah, 100%.
I think there was an element as well. I don't know about you guys, if you've ever had this experience. I suppose it was just, again, because I worked for very big companies. But this kind of desire of the company to be completely self-reliant. So anything that anybody needed in terms of growth, development, no matter what level you were at, came from internal. So there was no reference to other organisations that could help you. There was no kind of partnership with other companies that could support in perhaps where that company wasn't an expert, all that kind of thing. There was no.
And I think we're going.
Outreach.
Yeah, I think we're going down that route of costs again, aren't we? I'm not going to go outside the business. I'll use what we've got inside because I don't want to spend the money. But also, there's sometimes, and again, I mean, all of this, by the way, is just speculative, and it's all based on some experiences in some companies, and not all companies do these things, right? But I'm sure in some companies there's going to be some hubris involved as well. We don't need people on the outside. We can do it ourselves. And again, it's just this narrow-minded kind of, do I need a different perspective? I mean, I'm mentoring people at the moment who are senior leaders and are very, very good at what they do. And yet they've decided to get me to mentor them for a different point of view and to give them some insights and ask them questions they might not ask themselves, that kind of stuff. But some people don't see it that way. And again, this is outdated attitudes, but I'm convinced it's going to filter through. 20 years from now, the workplace will be very, very different to what it is at the moment. We'll probably still be talking about some of the similar problems, but I think it'll be a lot more easily received by the new breed of leader in 20 years' time.
Should we come back in 20 years and have this conversation again and just see?
I'm going to jump in a time machine now. I want to go ahead and start getting some business. Yeah.
Definitely. I hear a lot about Gen Z in the kinds of work that I do. And my response is always, okay, complain about them now, but they'll be running your company in 20 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These
are your future leaders, so put effort into them.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to get there without you. So,
And also, I think acknowledging that just because something's different doesn't make it right or wrong. I think
No.
We've got to that point of, that's good, that's that. People say to me all the time, what's an example of a good leader and a bad leader? And I'm like, I'm not answering that question because, what's good to somebody will be bad to someone else. And that's very, very individual. And I think it's not helpful to your point, you can't complain about them because they are going to be the futures. But everyone complained about millennials when we arrived.
I know.
It's just that, it's that normal process of a different generation coming in and wanting to have a label and wanting to find some fault. But I think there is, there's so much opportunity there. Like you said, you've got to develop, nurture, support, to be the leader today that they're going to need to be in the future. That's ultimately what it is.
And I'm very interested actually to see what happens when my son grows up. He's Generation A. So I'm kind of like, okay, what's Gen A going to look like? And compared to Gen Z, it's going to be, intriguing to see where this goes. Because I think to some extent, I'd always had it.
I don't think there's a huge difference between us all. I mean, people like to drive wedges between the generations, or they'll use it as, and everyone always says, oh, it was better in my day, this, that, and the other. Every generation, my grandparents said it, my parents have said it, I'm saying it, other people, and it's always been that way. But we've got four or five generations of people working in the workplace together. And fundamentally, we want respect. Fundamentally, we want to be listened to. Fundamentally, we want to be developed and grow and fulfill our potential. That's pretty much what we want to do in the workplace and contribute. And everybody wants that. And that's the core element. All we need to do is suss out around the outside. How do we facilitate that? How do we mediate that with different people based on their needs? I think this Gen Alpha, Gen Z, all that sort of stuff, only come about in I've not heard anything about it 20 years ago, and before that, it's literally a fairly recent thing that it's suddenly become this big headline maker. And I'm convinced that's down to technology, and that's pretty much all it is, and how savvy you are with technology and how it affects your life. And that's pretty much all it is. From an interpersonal perspective, wants and needs, looking at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we all want the same thing. And it's just how as leaders do we facilitate that with different people? And that is literally know your people. Know them, know what makes them tick. Get under the skin, find out why they come to work every day and what gets them out of bed, and give them that opportunity. But again, that takes a skill. It takes communication skills, as Jenni mentioned, and the ability to interact with different people on different planes, which needs development. And me and Jenni are here to help.
I think ultimately it's the strategic case for people-centered leadership is without it, there's no longevity, is there? If you want your business to be here in 20 years so Gen Z can take over, go down that way.
You have to invest the time. You have to invest the time in people. And there's no shortcut for that. And I think that's the other thing that's interesting. At this Gallup event I was at the other day, which was in partnership with the Institute of Directors. And so there was a room of about 30 different people from the Institute of Directors. And there were so many questions that basically was saying, can you just tell me what to do? And the framework I can apply to everybody and fix this. That was the essence of most of the questions. And it was like, there's no shortcut. Like I can give you a framework. I'm sure we've all got frameworks that help leaders be better leaders, but that still means that you've got to put in the work and the time to get to know them.
Absolutely.
And I think that this desire for that shortcut, I want it quickly, which is, what's happened with technology. You can get everything instantly and all this stuff. You just want a quick fix, and it's not that. And I think maybe that's the light bulb moment we need people to realize, which is this isn't an overnight thing. Like this is going to be to your earlier point, James, probably right at the start of this conversation. This is consistent, intentional, showing up every day work.
Habitual. Yeah,
it is. Yeah. So sorry about that. We can't give you just a magic pill.
Yeah, the red pill, blue pill. Which one would you like? Yeah.
Which I suppose actually probably answers the first question I posed to you both as well about why there's this tension between profit-driven cultures and people-centered leadership, is that actually in profit-driven cultures, everything should have been yesterday.
Yeah.
And in people-centered leadership, you can't get there yesterday.
No.
It's going to take a few weeks.
That's the thing, I think. Yeah. I mean, you got to think about exactly what you just said there, Laura. Actually, it's quite insightful, is that, these profit-driven cultures, people looking at spreadsheets is always historical. Everything on a spreadsheet, you can make predictions, but everything on a spreadsheet, everything about your numbers, everything you see on a system, a CRM system, where it's all historical. It's all gone. It's happened. Leadership is about the future. It's about driving people to achieve something tomorrow and this afternoon and next week and next month and next year. It's not about what's happened in the past.
Yeah.
I agree.
Oh, God, Phil sounds so wise. Well, you two
I
do. I
know.
just come
Don't
to
we?
say that.
Oh, you'll play this back and I'll be like, who was that?
I need this transcript. That's some good stuff.
Do you know, I always listen back to these recordings and I just sort of think, wow, that was a really good moment. Like,
Yeah.
you know, there's always something with every single guest. Even the episodes I do by myself, I'm always listening back going, that was quite insightful.
I normally listen to it and think, do I sound like that? Really? Yeah.
Well, there are many profit-heavy cultures across different sectors and industries, as we've already discussed, and I have worked in some of them, as I said. And strangely, there were a lot of people-centred leaders in them, ironically. But those people always faced a lot of challenges being able to push those qualities and skills through to the surface. We have spoken a bit about where the idea of leadership comes in, like leadership development comes in, where that curiosity, that kind of self-led learning and development comes in. How do we then, as their leaders, go about championing them?
Championing them in what context?
In the context of ensuring that they don't hide in the background, that actually they don't push down all of that people-centered stuff and just start doing what their own leaders used to do. How do you champion them to make them feel like it's okay to be a people-centered leader and actually we need you to be?
Okay. Example.
To find a balance. I think that it's not, I know we've talked about, profit or people-centered. It's not necessarily either or, is it? Because actually, if you're people-centered, you'll drive profit. Like I was listening to a podcast with Gary Ridge and Simon Sinek the other day. Gary is the ex-CEO of WD-40, and he's talking all about how he did people-centered leadership and how that had phenomenal growth and success. So they are linked, and I think it's that story to tell. I think it's let's find that story of you leading this way, the impact that's having, and let's keep telling that story. I often talk about being like a Trojan mouse in an organization. And I think there is opportunities there to be that and don't feel that you have to conform to the overall culture. I also say this to a lot of heads of functions that I might work with. You can create the culture in your team. You're allowed to do that within the confines of what you're doing. You can nudge things a little bit and start to be that seed of change, because if you don't, then it's never going to shift. But I think you can, the trick for me would be, how do we tell the story of joining these two together to help raise your profile, but also show everybody else what's possible?
I really loved Gary's approach to his relationship with his leader. So when they come into the business, he would say, not I'm your manager. He would say, I'm your coach.
And coach. Yeah.
Loved it.
Yeah.
I thought that was,
in there. Yeah.
Yeah. Such a shift that happened, like just by that small wording adjustment of just being able to say, no, there's a big difference between coach and manager, and everybody knows it. If I come in pointing the finger going, I'm your manager, I'm here to make sure you meet the targets. Whereas if I come in saying I'm your coach, I'm here to support you. I'm here to make sure that you get to the best version of you. I'm here to champion you. I'm here to, it's such a different relationship. And then when you go as the leader to put those seeds of change into cultures and be the next step that the organisation needs to take, you know that you've got the backing of your leader because they've come in saying, I'm your coach.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Going to be a while before that becomes the norm, though, let's be honest.
Yeah, probably.
There was a magic word in there, Laura. And the magic word is culture, which is driven by behaviours and many, many other things. There's something called the cultural web, which looks at all the different aspects that feed into culture. Messages, signs and symbols, conversations and stories. There's all these different elements to it. And I think the conversations and stories piece is something that we can do every day by communicating with our people in a way like you just mentioned, saying that I'm your coach, I'm here to support you, etc. But it's not just about words, it's also about living it and breathing it and doing that. It's all right saying I'm here to support you, I'm here to coach you. Why haven't you done this? When the results are against us. But there's a guy called John Elkington. If you've ever heard of him, he did the triple bottom line. He created the theory of the triple bottom line, which coined the phrase, which is people, planet, profit. And I think all three of those things, if you have KPIs, and again, you can't manage what you can't measure. You want to manage culture, you want to manage people being good leaders and all that. You need to measure it somehow. If you can keep your KPIs and your business focused towards people, planet, and profit, then you're going to be appealing to the young people that are coming through who's got a massive focus on our environment and the way that the planet is going. The people element, as we've already said, are the main resource you have in your organization. They are the ones that drive everything. They're the ones that drive whether we can affect change towards the planet. They're the ones who drive whether we can achieve profit. But you focus on the people, the planet and the profit will take care of themselves, kind of thing. So it's about measurements as well. So what KPIs, how do we send messages out there that show rewards and highlight things that we want to highlight? If we want good leaders, how do we measure that? How do we advertise that through the business as a key focus? That's the question. I think that's something we're coming to as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's such a big thing that I've certainly been seeing this year of that consequence and the behaviours, because I think a lot of organisations have shied away from some of the more traditional HR things like competency frameworks and things like that. And without those, it does make it very difficult to have consequences and talk about behaviour and measure that and do that. Otherwise, without that, you're relying on individual belief systems, which does cause chaos because you've got so many differences in there in terms of lived experiences and then what's fair, what's equal, what's all of those things. It becomes way more chaotic if you don't have something like that. I don't think it needs to be something huge and complex, but I think if you've got a set of values in your organisation and you've got a set of maybe some cultural priorities that you're aiming for, then do the work to create the kind of behaviours, the mindsets, and then the competency framework that people can hold themselves to at different levels that helps you have those conversations. Because I do think that is missing. I think either the conversations are missing or the framework's missing, but it means that we're allowing behaviours to go on that aren't acceptable and we're not dealing with them. And that is causing issues in cultures for sure.
There are measurements that you can put in place for these things. And that's, do you know what? That was actually really solidified by, again, back to Institute of Leadership, another event that they did at the beginning of this year. They had Henry Stewart, founder of Happy, on the series that they were doing in January. And he was talking about like the culture within Happy and why he created it and how he wanted it to be. And most importantly, how they measured it. And he said that the target, essentially, that all leaders and the company as a whole is measured on, is that all staff are happy at least 80% of the time. He didn't make it 100% because he was like, that's unrealistic. Everybody's going to have a rubbish day. But if we can make it so that people are happy 80% of the time, then how much better off are we going to be? And I posed the question, it was something along the lines of, what do you say to people that sort of say to you, you're going to get walked over by being this way? And he said, well, I probably do, but my business is working.
And I went, focus on the measure. Yeah.
Yeah. He was like, I get better ideas. I get future leaders. I get, all of the measurements that I put in, including that 80% happy, actually happen.
Yeah. Brilliant.
That's down to, again, messaging and what people think the company's about and what the company wants you to do and what the senior leadership team's priorities are. That'll be a big thing around that. I mean, from a measurable perspective, happy is very scientific. It's like, what is happy? What does that mean? What is it to you? What is it to me? It's a very, 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 very huge, complex thing, happy. But from a messaging perspective and from a cultural perspective, I think it's huge. And that's probably why they're getting the results they're getting, because the people know that just the fact that you've said that, that's what we want. And forget everything else, we're interested in that. Tells me this is a place I want to work because people care about me.
It's one thing, right? And I think I'm not a big fan of focusing on people being happy at work, just because I think it's for you to you control your own happiness and no other person can. But that aside, I like the simplicity of it. Like that's that one thing. That's what we're going to focus on. We're going to build everything around that. I think we have too many things in organizations that make it hard for people to focus on the people. Whereas if you said, actually, we just want to focus on building trust. Like there's a huge trust issue in everywhere at the moment. So that's what we want to do. We want to make sure that people trust each other and they trust the leadership. If that's your one focus, then that narrows your scope of everything that you're doing. And I think maybe that's part of the thing that would help leaders is just narrowing, just take stuff away and just narrow the focus, because I think you get much better results than trying to make sure you're measuring all of these different things. Maybe that's not helping either, that there's just too many measures of stuff that doesn't allow for that really focused work.
it does get very complex. Very complex. That even as an experienced leader, there were points where I just thought, too much data.
Yes.
Too much stuff I've got to focus on. Too many numbers like going through my head. Week on week, I was expected to know backwards for when the manager above me came in and asked me about what was going on.
Yeah.
There was
And
so
this is the
much to
messaging,
focus
right?
on.
This is the messaging. If the people above you are asking you about the number and you've got to memorize the number and you've got so much numbers, it's numbers, numbers, numbers. And that is all you're going to focus on is the numbers. And that tells me that that's the most important thing for me as a leader is the numbers. And it takes us right back to the beginning of this conversation.
I actually work with an organisation at the moment who they do, I can't remember what they call it, but they have like a meeting every Friday and they celebrate success across the team. So they celebrate, professional achievement, a personal achievement, and then they do it like a shout out for each other as well. And I actually thought that's brilliant because it's not about the numbers and it's bringing the whole team together. And I've actively seen people in that organisation go, well, what's the point? What's the point? I don't need praise for just doing my job. Other people don't need praise for just doing your job. It's like, you do. And I made a point to some of them one day. I wrote the 9 times table on the whiteboard just randomly while they were talking. And they sort of said, okay, why did you write that? I said, oh, it's just, something I'm doing. And one of them took a look at it and he said, the last one's wrong. Because I'd written 10 times 9 equals 99. And he's like, but the last one's wrong. And I was like, well, what about the 9 I got right? Don't ignore that.
Yeah.
Just little things like that. It changes things.
Yeah, it does. I think, it's doing it in a way that feels very genuine. And I think that's always the trick with things like that. I've been in organisations. Yeah. I've been in organisations where we've started every meeting with kind of, what people have done over the weekend. Lovely. And then at the end of the meeting, they would do a sort of like feedback after the session, like, how did this meeting go? And I hated it. So I was like, this is such a waste of time. This feels so contrived. Like, it doesn't feel genuine at all. It feels like an opportunity. And not everybody wants feedback straight away. There was no like agreement about how it just really didn't work for me. And I do think there is finding that balance of what does and doesn't work. And that's genuine. And I think that's important. I always use genuine rather than authentic because I like to make that distinction. But I do think it has to be something that's genuine. But I also think you're right. We spend a lot of time focusing in on something that's bad that's happened and not the good. And having a moment to celebrate the good, especially when you work remotely, is really important. Even if you build it into a team meeting once a month, like just have something that is some sort of recognition and celebration of something. Because otherwise it just feels very hard. And I think for a lot of people at the moment, work feels hard. It's not something that people are really enjoying. And we've lost our ability to have fun and joy at work because people are too quick to say, well, how is this adding value and what does this really mean? And, all that stuff. Whereas we're just used to have fun.
And I think that speaks to the theme of your book as well about credible leadership rather than authentic leadership, in that if you are a people-centered leader or you want to be a people-centered leader, to actually have that genuineness, if that's a word, about your, the way that you celebrate, the way that you focus on the good, the way that you pay attention to people, the way that you ask for feedback at the end of a workshop. If you've got that genuineness about it, that builds credibility because that is showing I give a shit.
Yes. Yeah. And interesting. And I want to know, and I want to improve that. Absolutely. But you might do that a week after because you might not want it in the moment because that doesn't work for you. And that's fine. There has to be...
That's knowing your people.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, we've gone full circle again, haven't we? It's all about knowing your people.
Yeah. Well, I think it's all these things are interlinked, and it is a minefield. It's a huge thing. It's not that easy. Otherwise, everyone would do it. One's the understanding the need to do it. And the second one is how do I do it? And the people like us wouldn't exist, Jenny, if it was that easy.
Yeah.
And it is because of all these different interlinking, interwoven elements that need to come together to provide this genuine, real people focus that is valued and that adds to results, but in a way that doesn't look at numbers all the time. So it's very, very complicated. It's very, very, we've already mentioned the skills that are involved in being a leader, and we're picking it apart right now, and it's starting to unravel. It's multifaceted. There are lots and lots of different areas that have to be ticked with regards to leadership skills, with regards to what people want, with regards to being able to communicate to those people and understanding those people, with regards to the processes and structures you have in place with regard to the messaging around the business. Does the CEO get his own parking space, or is it a free-for-all? Which, that kind of stuff. There's so much to consider, and all of this needs to be mapped out. All of it needs to be mapped out, and then look at what strategy you're going to employ in each of those areas that is right for the people.
Absolutely. And understanding.
Me and Jenny can help with that, by the way. I don't know if I've mentioned that. What about who does get it right? I mean, you've mentioned Happy, and there are, I'm sure, lots of other examples of organisations that do get it right. I mean, even they don't get it 100% right, but they're the ones that you'd probably, if you're going to pick anyone to look at, they're the ones you might look at. And I think we mentioned, you sent a bit of a brief through to us beforehand, and one of the things to look at was that. And I looked at one that's always stuck out in my mind anyway, but I had a little bit more of a dig deep into it, and that's Timpson's. Very, very famous for taking prisoners out of prison, not literally. That's called breaking people out. That's not allowed to do that. But when they get released from prison, they would employ prisoners as managers to run their retail shops, give them the grooming, give them the leadership training, give them the ability to run that as if it's their business as well. That freedom, that trust, all the things that they would probably not expect to have after being released from the environment they've just come from. And they have this, giving them a second chance basically, and they have this upside down management approach where the people have the opportunity to run the business, make decisions as if it is their own business and as if they own it themselves, with a key focus on kindness and trust. That is like a key sort of value that goes through the organization. 2023 was their financial year in 2023. Bearing in mind that's what they focus on. There are a few numbers because you need to know your stock coming in, your stock going out, etc. of course. But because they focus on kindness and trust, 2023 was 83% higher or stronger than the year before COVID. So bearing in mind they've gone through COVID and all that struggles and all those challenges, and bearing in mind the retail market is dropping through the floor, it has been for a long time, they had a stronger 2023 than 2019, 83% higher. And in 2023, their revenue was up from 297 million to 332 million based on 2022. So in 1 year, it had grown massively as well. And they're opening 40 to 50 outlets a year still. And that's an organization that that obviously looks at the numbers, because you have to, but focuses on the people, focuses on giving people a second chance, focuses on allowing people that freedom to manage the business as if it is their own, and focuses on kindness and trust. So there for me is a case study in success based on a people-centered approach.
There's so much to be said for that freedom in a framework, which I talk about a lot, which I heard in a book linked to culture as well. And I talk about it a lot because that's exactly what you've described, is you're being given that freedom to run the business like it's yours. Yep. There will be a framework to that because you're part of something bigger. Of course. But to have that freedom within that framework makes a huge difference. And we did this when I was head of internal communication in an organisation. We had a strategy, and that had to go down to all of the stores in the UK. And to do that, we didn't dictate what they had to do against each of the 5 pillars of that strategy. It was very much like, this is the framework. You can now do what you like. If you want to do, we're a food-based business, so if you want to do food tasting, or you could do what you like. It doesn't matter, but this is the essence of the strategy, and it's up to you to do what you want to do in that store. And I think that is where the gold can really happen all the way through the organisation, to give people that empowerment, not necessarily autonomy, because that is harder to do, I think, further down, but certainly that empowerment, I think, is key.
I also mentioned, Laura, as well, psychological safety, that has to come into that as well. That if I do fail, I'm not going to be absolutely crucified for doing so.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. That's another place, though, where people often think, it's just about wrapping everybody up in cotton wool. And it's like, no, it's really not.
Well, no.
In fact, it's
accountability.
Look at the other side of that. Look at where psychological safety takes you. Look at the ideas that come out of you. Like there's this, when I talk about problem solving and decision making, for example, I always say you've got to have that space for solution generation. People have got to get through 10 crap ideas to get to the 11th good one. They need that space. This is where psychological safety comes in, is knowing that they can table every last crap idea just so that they can get to the good one. Mm-hmm. It's not just about like protecting everybody and wrapping everybody up in cotton wool. It's about, where it can take you is phenomenal.
But it's getting it right, isn't it? And it's making sure you're not getting sucked into those myths of psychological safety. There was a great piece in the Harvard Business Review that Amy Edmondson had written, I think, with someone else, to talk about the myths of psychological safety and how it's sort of being weaponized by certain people as being one thing when it's something else. And I think that's really important to make sure that we're being very clear about what it is in the organisations that we're in.
It's just about recognising what people need from that culture of psychological safety at the time, isn't it? Is it that they need a little bit more support, a little bit more TLC, a little bit more direction in where they can get help for something? Is it that they're just sort of, yeah, I'm all right for now, I'm just going to sit in the middle? Or is it that they're just going to go off on the other end and start chucking ideas at you, or that they need to have a difficult conversation with somebody and they just want your support in doing that? They need the confidence to be able to come to you and say, actually, I'm having a difficult time with so-and-so. Can you please help me work out how to structure the conversation with this person? All of that is psychological safety, just knowing that you can ask for help and you don't have to do this on your own, especially when it's a leader you're talking about. They need that understanding that they can come to you and we don't just go, you'll work it out.
Yeah. I haven't got time, but you'll be fine. You just crack on. Yeah. It's not the concept.
We've seen a lot of examples of support and championing people-centered leadership regressing in certain circumstances as well, even when the culture's quite strong around people-centered leadership. For instance, when budgets need to be cut, we mentioned that one earlier, one of the first things to go is often development, especially leadership development, or there's a reduction of the number of leaders in a team or a business, or those that leave just simply don't get replaced. Or the opposite, which I've actually seen happen a couple of times recently, is where the team grows and the amount of leadership presence doesn't grow with the team.
Yeah.
So a leader that was once in charge of 5 people is now in charge of 25 people. Then you perhaps need a second or third person, depending on the circumstance. So all the people-centered leadership approaches get abandoned because that leader then becomes overloaded, too busy, too many other distractions. So even if that circumstance is temporary, how do we then support those leaders to continue thriving when the culture's taking a temporary resist? What would you say to help those leaders continue being people-centered?
I think that's when the people-centered approach really comes to the fore. I think this is one of the greatest advertisements for people-centered approach, is that if you've been using the people-centered approach in advance of this, your people will be ready for it. So when these things happen, I think about my military experience. Yeah, people really gel, really come together and have their greatest moments when they're under pressure and when things are really against you. And it really helps to gel you and bond you together as a team. So thinking about, we said about knowing your people during those really, really difficult, challenging, high pressure situations at work, perhaps, and it could be a prolonged period of sustained pressure at work. If you know your people, you can position them in the right areas to help you. Empower them with extra responsibility. You'll have some leaders that you've probably groomed already to take your place, because that's what the best leaders do, is who's going to be taking over from you, or there'll be a competition between them because they're that good. And if you've got 20, 30 people, but you only had 10 before, now you've got 20, 30 people, but you've had a bit of time to have that people-centered approach with them, to learn all about those people, to understand their strengths. Forget the development areas. Think about when the shit hits the fan. It's the strengths that matter. Development areas are nice to have, so as long as they're at a required level that isn't what we call a fatal flaw. As long as they're above that level and they can do their job, that's fine. It's the strengths that really matter in times of high pressure, and knowing those means that you can distribute resource, responsibility appropriately, and it can actually be a massive team building event. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think the only thing I would add would be, if you find yourself in that situation where you've gone from 10 to 25 and you're running around because there is a situation where you don't have the time that you had before, because your time is now different. I do think it's about taking stock and figuring out how you're going to manage that. So my coach is a guy called Chris Ducker, and he always talks about hustle is a season. It's not a way of life. And I think if you're in a hustle season, then you have to adapt your ways of working to that. So it might be that when you had 10 people, you had one-to-ones with all of them every month. When now you've got 25, we're going to do things a bit differently, and this is what's going to work. So you've kind of got to know yourself as a leader in terms of what you're capable of, what you can do when you're in a hustle season, and what you can't, and then have that conversation and contract that with your team so that it's really clear in terms of those expectations. That's the biggest thing that would fall off, I think, in terms of that people-centered. You don't have to stop doing it, but you've got to manage expectations, and expectation alignment is such a huge part of the psychological contract of the employee experience. So without that, you're going to ruin, even if you've got enough, coins in the bank, you're going to ruin some of that relationship stuff. So just be clear about those expectations, what's shifting, how long it's shifting for, when you're going to review it, and then what happens after that. I think that's the key for me.
Oh, I think I have a good example of that, actually, because in my last permanent job, so we had a structure shift. In the first team I was in, it was quite a widespread area, but most of the tutors were in the same place. Most of the team was sort of focused around Hampshire, and the rest of us were kind of scattered out either side of that. But it was still enough for us to be able to cover the whole area in a day if you needed to. When I moved up to the East Midlands, the team initially was just sort of the East Midlands, that was it. But the structure of the team eventually became from Leicester to Newcastle. That was the whole of the area of all of our team. So the chances of running into another assessor were about zero. And of course, our manager now had to go from travelling from, somewhere around just before Birmingham to Lincoln, to going from travelling to Leicester to Newcastle's doing one-to-ones. The expectation then changed that instead of having one-to-ones once a month, we would then have them every 2 months. But what we would have is a slightly extended meeting. So there was actually room for all those conversations that may come up extra. And actually that made it, okay, it wasn't like, 2 meetings into one, but it was just a meeting a bit to ensure you still had that space to be able to talk to people about what you were doing. And actually that made a heck of a difference. And I actually found to some extent we had better conversations because of that slight extension of a single meeting every 2 months than we'd had previously, where it was 1 hour, get all the numbers out, and then we can go. So it did make a huge shift in the way that I was able to communicate, I think, with my managers, and I think the rest of the team said the same. So
if you're doing that as the manager and saying, like, this is how we're going to change stuff, you're really leading with that people-centered approach. I talk about being supportive as one of the 8 practices of credible leadership. That's that in action. You're leading with that. And so you're signaling to people, I value you, I respect you, you're important. Whereas if you wait for them to come to you, you're not giving that signal. And that's so important as a leader, that they can see their value and importance. We all want to belong. That's how we're built as human beings. So you've got to signal that, certainly during times of change and unrest, more than ever. And they did that brilliantly for you. So you still felt valued, important, and actually you had extra time, even though it wasn't the 2 sessions, you had more time, which it felt. So that's such a good signal around your importance and value. It's a really nice example.
There was another thought that came to me, which I think you've all seen because I think it was on your notes, around framing people-first decisions as risk management. If you focus on people-centered leadership rather than back to the numbers, back to the spreadsheets, then you're actually doing things like prioritising ethical leadership, fairness and inclusivity, which is more important these days than it's ever been. It's more at the front of the conversation than it's ever been. But it also does things like protect your brand reputation, not just with your customers, but with future staff. And it strengthens that reputation out. And that actually is a big chunk of what builds your business. So it contributes to financial numbers as well. You're actually managing risks by being people-centered.
Yeah. Yeah.
Towards the consequences again, isn't it?
Yeah. So in my work with the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, there's often conversations I have with other members in there that talk about the fact that PR isn't listed as a risk on the risk register when it should be from a reputation perspective. And your people are part of that. They are one of the stakeholders that you're trying to engage with. So there is always that element of risk that we don't talk about enough in terms of people and impact and what happens there. Maybe we need to go and talk to all the risk people as well as all the CEOs about all of this people-centered leadership stuff. We'll be out and about all year talking to everybody about it now.
Yeah.
Sure we could. There's a whole
Depends how
series
risky they see our conversations.
Oh dear. It has to be the thing about the whole risk thing. And I've been thinking about this as the conversation's been going from some of our earlier questions around, like, how do we really make this change happen? The problem that an organization is having has to be big enough to take action. And I think that's the same with risk, right? There has to be enough going on to warrant a change. And I don't know whether leaders, and they should, but I don't know whether leaders always feel that it's enough of an issue to change and do things differently. And I think that's I think that's part of the problem as well.
I think there's another dynamic which we haven't really touched on so much since COVID, out of sight, out of mind element. So, I mean, there's a lot of organizations who are all remote working now. So this whole kind of people-centered approach and trying to be inclusive and trying to make people feel they're part of an organization that has that value is way more challenging when they're sat in their bedroom or at their kitchen table working away every day and they don't see the environment, they don't see the posters, they don't see the plants in the office, they don't speak to their boss on a regular basis. Little cliques form because the only people you call on Teams are the people you like. And this is well-known study I've seen. So this is another dynamic to manage, is how do you promote, create and maintain a people-centered leadership approach in your organization when you're remote working?
My advice to all companies that started doing remote and hybrid for the first time during COVID was speak to the companies that have been doing this for decades, because I worked for 2 of them. And they have made it work and they know how to do it. And there is clear trust there. There is clear communication there. There is clear people-centered leaders visible that are able to step forwards, that are able to do what they do best and actually drive organisational outcomes. Talk to the companies that do it. My last job was part of a company that has been entirely remote for the last 30 years. And I'm like, so if they can do it, so can you. And they used to do everything on paper and via MSN Messenger.
Yeah. When people think remote, we think of a little cottage in the middle of nowhere, right? So remote doesn't mean lonely. Remote doesn't mean you can't bump into each other. Remote doesn't mean you can't meet at a coffee shop. Remote doesn't mean you can't make plans to come together as a team in certain locations. Remote doesn't mean you never go to the office. I think the in-person stuff becomes so much more important when you've got a traditional, what they call remote working team.
There's a clear difference between remote and work from home.
Remote working is your field salespeople that are out on the road 4 or 5 days a week and never speak to anyone but the customers. You know, that's the old remote working. I mean, the new paradigm we've got, the remote working, it isn't really remote working. It should be working from home. You're basically working from a different place, but you should get together with people you work with regularly.
If you could leave one piece of advice to others about championing people-centered leaders in profit-driven cultures, what would it be?
Gandhi, become the change you want to see in the world. So if you want things to change, you're a leader, you want the company or the organization or people to be led, managed a certain way, then do it. If the people above you don't manage you that way, don't care, do it. Manage the people the way you think is the right way to manage. And if you're not sure what the right way to manage is, as we spoke about earlier, get yourself some development.
If things aren't going the way that you want them to go, or you're not getting the outcomes you want to have, then it's time to look at yourself.
Love that.
As uncomfortable as that is where we have to go.
Doing a roundtable on this topic felt incredibly important to me, having seen firsthand how much more people-centred leaders achieve and how much better everyone comes out feeling, having still achieved targets or in a lot of cases exceeding them. Having both of you on to explore this today, I knew this would strengthen that case and show how this could be made a priority. If there's anyone listening out there who wants to connect with either of you, where can they find you?
You can find me at thejennifield.com and you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. And James?
Again, LinkedIn, as with Jenny, james.moffatt at embed-learning.co.uk, which is Embed Learning and Clear Training Limited. Again, you'll find me on the internet, on Google websites, wherever.
Amazing. And I'll put all those links in the description for this episode. Jenny and James, it's been a pleasure having you on today. Having watched you both speak in your areas of expertise, it was clear you'd bring those engaging and enthusiastic perspectives to the table, which you've absolutely done. You've both shared a lot of insight that will increase listeners' awareness of value and credibility of people-centred leadership in profit-driven cultures. I hope you've both enjoyed your guest experience today.
Been lovely. Thank you very much.
Enjoyable. Lovely, yeah. Be great to do it in person with a coffee. So this remote stuff.
I've known you for over a year, James, and I've only met you once in person. So
I know, yeah.
We should do it more often. It's been an insightful and empowering conversation. Thank you both so much for your time. Until next time, everyone.